Chapter 1: The Splitting Sky. The sky tore open, not with thunder, but with a dry, silver sound, like silk cut too fast. The seam widened, edges fraying, until the blue itself seemed to give way. Ash drifted down in slow feathers. First a few, then a veil. Fields dulled to gray in a single breath, as though the world had grown weary of its own colors.
Sir Edrin Vale hauled the reins tight. His horse stamped and snorted, breath smoking in the cold. Even the beast sensed it. Something had broken that should never break. Vale kept his jaw set, but his eyes lifted once to the sky, a frown tightening there despite himself. You never spoke of this, he thought toward the High One who had raised him, who had taught him every oath and given him his knightship. Did you not see it coming?
The child clung to his belt, face pressed into his side. Edrin turned in the saddle, long enough to glimpse her eyes. Blue and wide, cheeks streaked with soot. Too small to name what she was seeing, but not too small to feel the wrongness in her bones. She looked at him, eyes wide. "What's happening?" they seemed to ask. Edrin swallowed hard. "I don't know," he whispered, wishing he did. Above, the seam yawned wider. Beyond it was nothing. No stars, no light, only a flat hollow, a wound in heaven with no blood left to give. His hand went to the sword at his side. Habit, not hope. Steel could cut men, beasts, even the monsters sung about in taverns. But not this. Still, its weight steadied him, and steadiness was worth more than hope. He swung the child into the saddle before him. "Hold fast." His own voice came thin against the silence. He turned the horse toward St. Bran. The monastery crouched on the ridge, stone upon stone, the only place in these hills that still remembered how to stand. Ash clung to his lashes. He blinked, once, twice. For a heartbeat, he thought the seam had doubled. It had. Out of nowhere, a second slit ripped across the sky.
Narrow at first, then widening, directly above the monastery. Sparks and flecks of ash sifted down, like embers shaken from a broken forge. Edrin's gut clenched. "Not there," he breathed, the words breaking rough in his throat. "Not the monastery."
The words breaking rough in his throat. The horse froze, shivering under him. The child's grip tightened. And then the wind itself died, perfectly, offensively still. Ash drifted sideways, then stopped in the air, weightless. A world holding its breath. Edrin drew steel anyway. Habit, not hope. Chapter 2: A Flight. The monastery of St. Bran rose squat against the ridge, its stone blackened by centuries of wind and ash. Narrow windows glimmered like slits, and the bell tower leaned slightly, as if stooping under the weight of prayer. They said St. Bran had been a firekeeper once, a smith who died in the forge's flames. Now he was venerated as patron of endurance and ash, his effigies always painted with soot along the brow. In the villages, people swore oaths by his name, not out of reverence, but because he was thought to hear even curses. Edrin reined his horse at the foot of the monastery, the child clinging close against his side. For a heartbeat, they simply stared, as if measuring the silence that seeped from its walls. The gates of St. Bran stood ajar. Ash had gathered in their seams, frosting the hinges, muting what should have been a grind of old iron into silence. Edrin pressed a palm to the wood and pushed. The doors shifted, without complaint, opening onto the monastery's dim nave. Edrin stepped through the gate, the child pressed close against his side. Darian was waiting inside, a lanky novice in borrowed mail, his eyes brightening with relief at the sight of them. The armor hung loose on him, more noise than protection, but he straightened as if it mattered. He stepped toward the knight with a hesitant reverence, as though to unburden him. Edrin shifted the girl into his arms. Darian nodded, laying a hand briefly on the knight's shoulder. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, Both men felt it, a sense of relief, as though they had come home. Rows of villagers hunched in pews, a smith still wearing his apron, scrubbing soot into the cloth as if the stain would ever lift, a grandmother clutching the key to her house so tight the iron teeth cut her palm, a farm boy with a split lip worrying at the flagstones with his boot. Others shifted restlessly, some glancing upward toward the sky, others staring at the night with questions they didn't dare voice. Their silence had a weight to it, as though sound had been declared forbidden. At the far pew, Brother Anselm scribbled, hunched like a crow over his parchment. Ink bled across the page in smears, lines running into one another until they lost meaning. He didn't stop to correct them. His eyes were red-rimmed, fever-bright, but his quill scratched on, desperate to catch words before they fled. He glanced up only once, and his voice cracked in the stillness. "More refugees coming?" "From the road," Edrin said. "From everywhere." Anselm gave a curt nod and bent back to his page, as though confirmation of the world's ruin was just another line for the record.
Edran moved further in, boots whispering on stone worn smooth by centuries. Darian and the child stumbled beside him, nearly tripping on the flagstone. Darian caught her under the arm and set her straight, but the girl barely seemed to notice. Darian's gaze stayed fixed on the cruciform beams above,
where the faintest draft stirred old cobwebs into quivering threads. Someone stirred in the shadow near the altar. For a moment, Edrin thought it another villager too dazed to speak, but when the figure lifted her head, her gaze was not dazed at all. It was sharp, searching. She stepped into the half-light. Her cloak was stained with travel dust, her dark hair tangled with grit. She let her hand rest on the carved wood of the pew, her fingers moving along the grain as though she were tracing hidden script. Murmurs stirred among the pews. "Kisara," a few whispered, as though the name itself might burn their tongues. Her eyes tilted upward, though the rafters blocked the sky. "Tonight," she said, "the sun closes its eye." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a long breath, no one moved. Even Anselm's quill stilled above the page. The child shifted against Darian's side, but no sound left her. Edrin opened his mouth to demand what she meant, who she was, when the monastery bell began to move. The clapper swung. The bronze quivered. Yet no tone rang, no peal, no clangor. Each swing promised a roar that never came. Instead, a dull, crushing pressure rolled through their ribs. A vibration that made the chestbone hum, the marrow ache. People clutched their ears by instinct and found nothing to block. The child screamed, but no sound left her mouth. Her jaw stretched wide, face twisting, yet the only noise was the bell's mute pulse. Darian pulled her back against his side, staring wild-eyed at the swinging bronze. "I can feel it in my teeth," he whispered. The silent toll deepened, each swing pressing harder against the air. The smith fell to his knees. The grandmother dropped her key with a sharp clatter that felt louder than thunder. The door on the far side of the nave creaked open. Through it came Morgile. Her cloak smelled of smoke. Her hair was dusted gray with ash. Her hands were blackened to the palm lines, raw where soot had eaten skin. "Bar the gates," she said, voice steady though her pupils flicked quick as sparks. "I'll try the fire." She looked straight at Edrin. He had seen her before, once, long ago when she had served a baron who thought witchcraft could win wars. Her eyes were the same, unanchored, seeing too many layers.
Edron clenched his hand until the leather of his glove creaked. He had broken sieges. He had faced men who called themselves monsters. This was not an enemy. This was her. Someone he had known once, though he could not name the place or time. Memory wavered, leaving only the sense that absence had stepped into her shape.
"Darian," he said. A novice straightened, jaw just sprouting shadow. Eyes still bright with the kind of courage that hadn't yet met regret. He swallowed hard as the bell swung above them without voice. The rescued child pressed her face into Darian's side, trembling. Darian looked at Edrin, waiting, for orders, for assurance, for something steadier than silence. "Stay close," Edrin said. The bell swung on, noiseless as snowfall. Chapter 3. The Echo of Fire.
Morgale knelt on the cold stone and poured a circle of ash and salt with slow, deliberate hands. Her soot-stained fingers trembled only once. The villagers pressed back against the pews, whispers darting between them like startled birds.
"The witch brings ruin," muttered the smith, his blackened knuckles clenching. "She'll call the fire onto us," the grandmother rasped, clutching her house key to her chest.
The rescued girl whimpered, pulling at Darian's sleeve. Morgale ignored them all. She spoke the old words, syllables that seemed to sink into the stones instead of echoing in the air. Flame licked up from the circle. Not orange, not gold, black, like a shadow that had learned to burn. It writhed upward, silent, its edges fraying into air. The crowd recoiled. A woman cried out, tried to stamp at it, but her boot struck only stone. The fire gave no heat, no crackle. It was nothing, and it burned anyway. Morgale tossed in a splintered chair leg. The wood didn't char. It vanished, crumbled into gray dust that refused to fall, as though gravity itself had turned its face away. Several villagers crossed themselves. One spat on the floor. Another pressed his palms flat to his ears, as though sound might return if he begged hard enough. Edron stepped forward, voice rough. "What has happened to the sky?" Morgale did not look up. "The axioms are inverted," she murmured. "What rises now falls, what burns erases." On her palms, ash lines bloomed into sigils, patterns Edron dimly recognized from old chapel glass, but reversed, like mirrors choosing the wrong side of truth. She flinched at the sting, but did not let go of the words. Beside her, Ysara lifted her hands. The same faint marks lay there too, as though they had always been waiting beneath her skin.
The crowd gasped. "Twice marked," someone whispered. "Cursed," said another. Ysara's eyes stayed fixed on the black flame. "It doesn't come from here," she said softly. "It presses in, like the sky itself has split, and something waits on the other side." The villagers broke. The crowd gasped. "Twice marked," someone whispered. "Cursed," said another. Ysara's eyes stayed fixed on the black flame. "It doesn't come from here," she said softly. "It presses in, like the sky itself has split, and something waits on the other side." The villagers broke.
The smith surged forward, iron dark fists raised. A younger man wrenched up a pew slat like a cudgel. A mother clutched her child and screamed, end it, before it takes us all." Edron's voice cut through like steel drawn from a sheath. "Hold." He planted himself between Morgale and the mob, gauntlet lifted. His shadow split the firelight, steady where theirs flailed. "Not another step," he commanded. "If the sky itself is broken, you'll have answers. Not a riot." The villagers faltered, breath heaving, fear twisting into sullen obedience. None dared test the knight's tone. Darian's hand was clamped on his sword hilt, knuckles pale. His face twisted, torn between fear and something else. Then he gave a startled cry as if burned, snatching his hand back from the hot iron. "It's hot," he whispered, voice thin with awe. Edrin frowned. "It's a hilt, not a hearth." Darian nodded quickly, but his eyes lingered on the blade. The fire burned on. Black, silent, erasing. With each flicker, the nave seemed to hollow, the stone less certain beneath their feet. Shadows bent toward the circle as if listening, and still Morgale's voice pressed on, words sinking deeper, opening something that had already begun to open itself. From the archway staggered Brother Anselm. His robes were askew, ink smears dark on his fingers, a half-written scroll clutched tight in his fist. Letters bled from the parchment, running like fresh wounds, trailing down his wrist in black rivulets. His voice shook, but the words carried, "A messenger. He bleeds letters."
Chapter 4. The Call. The messenger lay arched on a trestle table in the monastery's refectory, body shuddering with each rasp of breath. It was the sound of the bellows with a hole in it, air pulled in, escaping too soon. His skin was carved, not hacked, not torn, but cut with deliberate care. lines clean as ink strokes. Across his shoulders, runes gleamed wet, black fluid welling from them. The smell was sharp, metallic, laced with the faint bite of frost. Darian gagged and looked away. "That's not blood." Brother Anselm leaned close, fascinated and horrified both. "Ink," he whispered. He touched the edge of the trestle where it pooled. The drops slid into shapes as they fell, curling into half letters before they splattered. The messenger's lips cracked apart. "The dead city," he breathed. "Caldrith. The crown lies there." His voice broke, rattled, then steadied for a moment of desperate will. "They said it could heal." Edrin bent closer. "Who sent you to get the crown?" The man's throat spasmed. His mouth opened, black spittle bubbling on his tongue, but no words came. Ysera's eyes did not blink. She watched him as though listening beyond the flesh, into the hollow his voice had left behind. "He speaks true," she murmured. "The words come from a mouth that no longer belongs to him." Ink seeped across the trestle, letters collapsing into stains. Brother Anselm's quill scratched furiously, capturing the phrases. But when he lifted the page, his stomach lurched. His careful lines had rearranged themselves. "The crown chooses blood," the script declared, neat and merciless in his own hand. The rest, his earlier words, had migrated, reshaped into new sentences, like soldiers shuffling ranks under a different commander. "The ink hadn't flowed from my thought," he whispered, horrified, "but from something using me as reed." "Lie," Anselm muttered after a moment. Then softer. "Or the only truth left." Morgale flexed her hands, watching the ash sigils burn faintly on her palms. "If the world is inverted, night, then even old warnings become invitations." Perhaps the crown was never meant to be touched. Or perhaps now it must. "We go," Edrin said. His voice was iron. At dusk, Ysera's gaze flicked to the slit of sky visible through a broken window. Ash whirled against the light. "Night," she said without looking at him. "Dusk has already happened. The sun began closing its eye an hour ago." A shiver ran through Anselm. He turned back to his journal. On the first page, his own name, Brother Anselm of St. Bran, was faint. He rubbed at his eyes, blinked. The letters thinned further, fading like smoke, as if the book itself were deciding it had never needed him. At the door, Darian shifted, hand white-knuckled on his sword hilt. The warmth pulsed there again. Steady as a heartbeat, not his own. Once, twice, a faint singe stung his palm. He drew a sharp breath and looked to Edrin, but said nothing. The silence after the messenger's last breath felt heavier than his dying. Chapter 5. The Pact. The altar stone of St. Bran was cracked clean through. Ash gathered in a split like gray stitching that had failed. Beeswax stains ghosted the corners. Someone had once polished this surface as if polish could hold a world together. Edrin stepped up onto the chancel and set his gauntlet flat to the stone. The leather creaked. The hush of the nave pressed in. No bell, no birds, only breath. "By my oath," he said. His voice did not echo. It landed on the rock and stayed there, a weight. "I go to Caldrith. I will bring back the crown." The refugees huddled in the pews, like a dark shoreline. The smith with soot in his knuckles, the grandmother hiding her bleeding palm in her sleeve. The boy with the split lip, chewing air, as if sound might return if he practiced enough. The smith barked a bitter laugh. "And what then, knight? You'll fetch a circlet from a dead city, and the sky will stitch itself whole? Oaths don't mend stone." Edrin's jaw tightened, but his gauntlet did not lift. "No," he said. "But men must go where stone has already broken. If nothing else, the path will not be left to silence." The hush shifted. Someone shushed the smith, but no one rebuked him. Morgale climbed the step next. The soot on her hands had worn into her skin. The ash lines on her palms had become her own lifelines. She pressed them to the stone, where Edrin's gauntlet had rested. "Then I go with him," she said. Her voice was raw, torn by smoke. "Not as shadow, not as shield. Equal." Ysara came after, her cloak dragging ash. She bent, and when her lips touched the altar, a flake of stone came away, lodging against her mouth. She did not spit it out. "For the sake of those who cannot," she whispered, "for the children who cannot follow." The boy with the split lip began to cry, not loud, but steady, like a roof dripping. Darian was next. He had not meant to stand, but his legs moved, and once moving, they did not stop. He placed the flat of his sword to the crack. The steel trembled in his hands. "I will not swear lightly," he said, "but I will not let them go alone." At the last, Brother Anselm stepped forward. His robes were dusted with ash, his ink-stained fingers twitching as if still clutching an invisible quill. He laid one trembling palm on the broken stone. "The words are failing," he murmured. "If you walk into Caldrith, someone must carry them still. Then let it be me." The 5 of them stood before the fractured altar, the vow lying between them like iron cooling in a forge. Outside, the ash fell soundless. The bell did not ring. Chapter 6. Ashbourne. They marched before dawn. The ash fell in slow, feathery snow, but it carried no chill. Each fleck that touched skin melted into nothing, leaving no wet trace, no stain. It was like being touched by absence. The road to Caldrith wound through hollow fields and broken fences until it spilled into the village of Grellin, or what had been a village. The thatched roofs had collapsed inward, timbers jutting like ribs. Doorways gaped black, some still holding hinges though no doors. The well stood dry in the square, its bucket rotting half-raised on a frayed rope. On the fence posts, chickens sat stiff, eyes open, wings tucked. They had not rotted. They had simply stopped. Darian shifted uneasily, hand on his hilt. "Where are the people?" Edrin didn't answer. His gaze caught on a bowl overturned in the dust. Oats spilled, still clumped with milk that had not soured. Beside it, a doll with one arm torn away leaned against a step. He felt the prickle at the back of his neck that told him not to breathe too loud. Ysara halted mid-square, head cocked, as though listening to something under the ground. "They're waiting," she whispered. Darian's voice cracked. "For what?" The answer came from the well, a groan of rope. Then gray shapes uncoiled, dragging themselves up and over the stones like smoke with bones inside. Eyeless, sharp-edged, their forms flared and shifted, never whole but always too human. They rose silent, their mouths fixed open, as though they were screaming without sound. Ashbourne. They moved without noise, sliding across the square. Dust puffed beneath their steps, but gave no sound either. As if the earth conspired with them. "Shields!" Edrin barked,
the sound of command cutting the hush. His sword rasped free, blessed steel flashing pale in the ashlight. The first wraith lunged. He swung hard. For an instant, the resistance was like cutting through frozen reeds, and then it burst into drifting flakes, scattering in gray clouds that stung the eyes. Where his blade fell, the ash on the ground rippled outward in a ring, as though the strike had weight beyond steel. Another Ashbourne lunged from the left. Darian barely raised his shield in time, the impact rattling up his arm, though the creature's limbs had no weight.
"Hold!" Edrin shouted. "They fall to steel!" "They don't fall at all,"
Darian gasped, arm shaking.
The shield burned cold where it met the Ashbourne, a frost print spreading before fading. Morgale stepped forward, eyes hard. She drew black fire down her arm and flung it in a sharp arc. The flame tore 2 wraiths from chest to spine, erasing them mid-step, leaving nothing but air. Her own skin burned. The circle of sigils on her palm lit with a dark heat. She gritted her teeth, hissed through clenched jaw, and through again. The fire came. The erasure took them. But blood welled from her palm where skin split. "Stop!" Anselm cried, clutching his book. "You'll kill yourself." The pages of his journal fluttered in windless air, ink bleeding faintly across the margins as though the words were trying to escape. She ignored him. The well belched more shapes. Ysera stood on its lip, eyes rolled white, her voice a harsh whisper. They want breath. They smell the heat of it. Her words brushed the air cold. Darian felt it freeze his lungs for a heartbeat, as though speech itself could thin the air. Then don't give it, Edrin roared, cleaving another into motes. Darian raised his sword. His hand shook. The hilt burned, heat licking his palm like it knew him. His pulse beat faster, but the sword had its own pulse. Steady, strong, seductive. For a moment, Edrin's back was outlined in silver. Perfect, vulnerable. The whisper slithered inside his skull. Cut him. Make room for yourself. His breath froze. Darian! Edrin bellowed. Swinging around, strike! The shout snapped him. He swung, blade biting a wraith lunging from his flank. Ash exploded around him, but his hand trembled after. His arm tingled as though the strike had missed the right target. The motes clung to his gauntlet longer than to the others, as though the Ashborn knew him. Ysera's head jerked toward the sky. More, she breathed. Too many. We must end it fast. Form line, Edrin barked, pulling the group together.
Shields locked, Morgale burning, Anselm clutching his useless quill as though he could write the world back into sense. The Ashborn pressed, silent but endless, until suddenly, emptiness. The last one broke against Edrin's shield and dissolved into motes that hung in the air and fell like dust.
The square lay still. Ash clung to armor, to lashes, to lips. No one moved. Not one of the wraiths had made a sound. Darian dropped to one knee, chest heaving. His hand was still locked on his hilt, as if afraid to let go. Edrin clapped him on the shoulder once, firm. Good strike, Squire. Darian nodded. He didn't tell him that his palms still tingled, that it longed to turn the blade sideways, to finish the swing he hadn't dared. The chicken stared. The doll leaned. The air smelled of iron and ash. Chapter 7. The Betrayer. The rope snapped. It didn't crack so much as go slack. One instant taut across Edrin's glove, the next weightless, falling in a lazy curve that had no right to exist above a gulf with no depth. Sister Mael's eyes met his as she dropped. They were wide and terribly calm. Her mouth made the shape of a prayer. Edrin lunged, caught her wrist for a heartbeat, leather biting bone, and the black below accepted her without ripple, like water that forgot how to be wet. His fist closed on nothing. His oath rang in his skull like an empty bell. The rope's end dangled clean-cut, not frayed, not torn. For a moment he only stared at it, the fibers swaying in the air. And memory pressed against him. Mael in the village, when Morgale had stumbled from the fire, skin blistered and raw. The others had cursed her, some had raised stones. Mael alone had stepped forward, breaking a sprig of leaves between her palms, laying the balm gently against the burn. Smoke poisons, balm heals, she had whispered, voice steady in the roar of hatred. She hadn't asked leave to follow them afterward. She had simply walked on when they turned from the ashes. And now she was gone. Ash drifted across the gulf like slow snow. The span groaned, rope whispering against rope. Behind him, Darian's voice cracked. She didn't even scream. Morgale's face was pale in the ashen light, her scarred skin drawn tight. She touched her arm, where Mael's balm had once cooled the burn, as if the memory itself had been cut away. Anselm bent toward the severed end, ink-stained fingers trembling. This was no failure of rope, he rasped. It was severed. The words hung in the void. Darian swallowed hard. That's too neat. Rope doesn't part like that. Morgale's voice was low, strained. Or the world itself has turned knife against us. Silence gathered like a weight. No one answered. The wind across the gulf said nothing either. Then Edrin lifted his head. His eyes moved from face to face, each shadowed by the swaying rope. Who would do such a thing? Not Darian, still pale and shaking. Not Morgale, though the villagers had once named her witch. Not Anselm, with his trembling hands. Not Ysara, whose gaze stayed fixed on the gulf, as if listening to something only she could hear. And yet the thought remained. One of us. The span creaked, straining in the wind. Beneath them the gulf waited, patient and black. "Bind the rope," Edrin said at last. His voice was iron, but his throat was dry. "No one crosses till it's made fast." No one moved at first. Darian fumbled with the coils, his hands shaking as though the cord itself might bite him. Morgale stooped to help, her scarred face unreadable. Anselm muttered fragments of scripture under his breath, each word falling like ash. Ysara whispered something softer still, her lips shaping syllables the air refused to carry. When the rope was bound again, the span swayed with a different weight. Suspicion clung heavier than the gulf. None said it aloud. None needed to. One of us had cut the rope.
Chapter 8. The Crown. At the far end of the bridge, the world made a room that should not exist. Bridges end in stone or soil, in gates or graves. This one ended in neither. Basalt ribs rose from a floor polished to mirror dark, bowed inward as if the hall itself were breathing. Their footfalls vanished without echo, swallowed by the stone. The atmosphere carried whispers of wet cinders and chilled iron, the lingering trace of a smithy grown cold. No moss, no rot, no scent of life, none of what ruins were meant to carry. This place was not ruin at all. It was too clean, too deliberate, as if it had been made ready for them. Morgale's nose wrinkled. She whispered the old words, each syllable like a ward against air gone sour. The murmur rasped softer than cloth on cloth, yet in the hush it cracked like tinder. Anselm heard it too clearly, and wondered if she spoke to steady herself, or to name something the rest of them could not see. He hugged the journal tighter, listening to the thrum of his own pulse, afraid the silence might unright him the moment he loosened his grip. His stiffness did not escape Darian, who watched the scribe's knuckles whiten as though he clutched more than parchment. Darian's hand twitched against his hilt, the leather creaked under his grip, and the steel beneath gave back a faint warmth, answering the hush like a heartbeat that was not his. The heat felt almost audible, a low throb pressing through his palm. Ysara caught that motion, eyes narrowing at the blade as though weighing whether the sound she thought she heard, metal ticking faintly against its scabbard, belonged to the weapon or the man. Her gaze climbed higher, following the ribs overhead. Dust drifted down in weightless motes, silent as falling ash. And to her eyes, the black arches carried the ghost of script etched into the bone of the hall itself. At the edge of them all stood Edran, helm shadowing his face. The scrape of his breath against steel was the only sound he made. He watched their mutters, their grips, their stolen glances, and gave back nothing. In that oppressive stillness, his silence bound them tighter than words, and sharpened the unspoken question. If betrayal already walked among them, had it not the shape of him?
His jaw clenched. The thought was poison. Why would he even imagine it? He shook his head, as if to scatter voices that were not his.
Even the mirror floor gave back their shapes thinner than they were, reduced as though the hall preferred smaller truths than the ones they had carried inside. At the center stood a chest of ironwood, bound in links the color of old tongues. The chains didn't fasten it shut so much as persuade it not to open. Letters stamped along each link in the old script, then crossed out by their own shadows. The wood was warm beneath Edran's glove, damp, as if it remembered rain from an age that had no weather. Flanking the hall stood basalt figures, 6, 9, 12, never the same number twice. At first they seemed only statues, eyeless hollows where faces should be, mouths left open as if something had tried to speak through them, and failed. Yet their stance was too natural, the tilt of their heads too human, as though breath had only just departed. Darien shifted his grip on the hilt, knuckles pale against the brass cap. The sound of leather creaking was louder than it should have been. Anselm raised his quill, meaning to mark their number, then lowered it again. The count slipped from him like ink that would not stay. Ysara did not count at all. Her gaze stayed on those hollow mouths, watching as if words might still be gathering there in the dust. Morgale broke the hush with a sharp spit onto the polished floor. The gesture was ward more than contempt. But even that small noise vanished as though the air swallowed it whole. She laid her palm to the nearest chain.
Her skin glowed faintly. She hissed and pulled back.
Bound with language, her voice trembled. Not steel, but a spell. Words hammered into a curse that cannot break.
Then she spoke the wrong tongue. Each syllable dropped heavy, like stones into a dry well. The lynx sighed once. Darien flinched. Every time she used that tongue, he felt it shiver in his chest, as though the words reached places his own blood should have guarded. The heat in his hilt answered, a pulse too quick for his age, and he hated that no one else seemed to notice.
For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then dust spilled from the guardians' mouths. And something else. From the seams of the ribs bled ink, not liquid but alive. Letters slid down the stone like black veins, pooling and rising, knotting into half-shapes, limbs hooked with commas, jaws chewing on unfinished words.
Anselm staggered back. Ink dripped from his palm to join them, as if summoned. His lips cracked around horror. "The messenger," he gasped. "This place, this is where they questioned him. No, where they tore him. These are the ones. They wrote him apart until every vein was a sentence, until he bled only letters." Ink bled down the ribs, pooling dark on the floor. The pool quivered, divided, and rose into shapes. Then, suddenly, the shapes lunged, creature forms made of broken script. One arm was a sentence torn mid-word. Where it struck, basalt powdered into silence. The statues woke as well. Stone joints ground, hollows yawning wider, and with each step, they unstitched sound instead of making it. "Move," Edrin barked, though his grip clung white to the lid. A pulse answered him from within, not his own, thrumming up through his arms. For an instant, he could not tell if the shout had been his voice or the crown's.
Morgale spat the wrong tongue again. Chains buckled. One guardian froze mid-step. Two more shuddered free. Anselm's quill snapped. Ink splattered across the floor, crawling into crooked lines before it fell. The crown heals what it breaks. The words blurred, reversed, or breaks what it heals. For a breath, the hall stood still, as if weighing which truth to keep. Darien swung. The hilt burned eager in his hand. Iron met basalt. No sound, only a shudder through bone. The guardian staggered, as if reminded what a wound was. Black spray streaked his cheek, searing into twisted scars that read like letters no one could finish. He cursed and struck again. The mark stayed, a sentence cut short. Anselm fumbled at his belt and drew the short knife he normally kept for parchment. He rammed it into the crack Darien's blow had opened. The blade screeched and bent, steel straining. For a heartbeat, the guardian reeled, stone grinding like teeth. Then the knife snapped, the broken shard biting into Anselm's palm. His blood spattered across the wound in the basalt. The guardian convulsed, runes flaring pale red where the drop struck. For a moment it staggered, frozen mid-step, stone seams shuddering as if unsure whose body it carried. Anselm staggered back, clutching his bleeding hand, stunned at what his blood had done. Darien did not wait. He swung into the opening the blood had carved, iron finding weakness where no steel should. The hilt burned eager in his grip, and the strike split the basalt deeper than before. Black spray burst in half-formed letters, streaking across his cheek and searing into scars that read like an unfinished line. The guardian lurched, joints cracking, silence pouring from its hollow mouth. Edrin's arms trembled with the crown's weight. Heat climbed his chest, synced with his heart until he could not tell which beat was his. A metallic tang filled the back of his tongue, like biting a coin. "Night," Ysara said, eyes on his throat. "It listens to you. Only you." Then let it listen, Edron growled and tore the crown from the chest. He raised it high, iron rings trembling in his grip, and roared a battle cry. The sound ripped through the hush like steel through cloth, the first noise the hall had allowed, and the crown's pulse thundered back, louder, as if answering. The remaining chains fell slack, the letter creatures convulsed, pages tearing in a wind that wasn't there. The guardians froze, fissures racing their bodies. Then, as if duty ended, stone and script collapsed, ink spattered, dust settled, but one word lingered on the floor, still wet, still alive. Wait. The hall stilled. Edran held the crown. It pulsed beat for beat with his own heart. Morgale's warning fell flat into the hush, swallowed whole before the echo could form. Then take it, knowing it will take in return. Anselm's fingers dripped ink that would not stop forming letters. Darian touched his cheek where black scars burned. His skin spelled something he could not read. Ysara's gaze fixed on Edran's pulse. The polished floor reflected them poorly, choosing smaller, thinner versions. Faces slightly wrong. Edran lowered his head. He whispered the only sentence left that wasn't a lie. We take it, and it takes us. The pedestal waited at the hall's heart like an anvil set for a neck. Inscriptions coiled its sides, tight script wriggling when stared at too long, strokes crossing themselves out, rewriting back in. Meaning fought to be born. The top was a shallow bowl of stone, dark as wet slate, ringed by a gutter where something once ran and dried hard. Morgale pressed her palm to the rim. Ash sigils in her skin flared. She hissed. Old law, she said, voice thin. It bites when you touch it. She traced one line, it burned her finger. Where sky splits, oath binds. She swallowed. It seeks the blood of an oath-bearer, not a king, a knight.
Her hand shook. The script burns deep. It does not want a mark. It wants a vessel emptied. Darian frowned. What does that even mean? Morgale's reply was flat. It means more than a cut. A lot more.
The crown, still in its ironwood bed, pulsed once, slow, satisfied. The soundless thud pressed into Edran's chest like a hand.
So it will be mine, he said. My oath, my blood. But Ysara's gaze slid to Darian, and for a breath, no one agreed.
The words rearranged something inside him. He saw St. Brand's cracked altar, Sister Mel's small smile vanishing without ripple, the rope slack across his glove, not torn, not frayed, but loosed, his fist opening. Memory, or a lie the crown was stitching into him? He tasted metal and could not tell if it was prophecy or guilt. There is another way, Ysara murmured. She did not step closer. She didn't need to. Her gaze fixed on the pedestal, then on the hollow of Edran's throat. But it ends with blood, too. Only the names differ.
You are not the only one who swore an oath. I am the only knight, Edran returned. Her voice thinned, sharp as a cut. Are you? The crown pulsed. Darian flinched.
Anselm opened his book. His name on the first page was gone, blank margin to margin. He turned a leaf. Words he had written, dates, names, the silent bell, wavered and slid apart. They reformed into phrases that were not his. They gathered to a verdict. The crown chooses blood.
You could knight me, sir, Darian said, the words tumbling before he meant them. Edran's glare stopped him cold. Anselm pressed his thumb down, trying to anchor the text. For a heartbeat, the pad of his thumb blurred, transparent at the edge.
Perhaps only what I write remains, he whispered. His voice was thin, far down a corridor. A crooked smile. Or perhaps even that will not.
Close it, Morgale said. She didn't look at him. If the page is a door, stop holding it open, before something comes through. He looked at her, fear in his eyes. Something. He shut the book. The blankness did not care. Darian stood near the chest, brass-capped hilt, snug in his palm. Heat climbed his arm to the hollow of his throat, where a second pulse had taken root. Patient, certain, not his own. It kept time with the crown. Each beat answered its silent throb across the hall, until the two rhythms fused and pushed aside the one that belonged to him. You must strike him down, the pulse seemed to whisper. Only then. will the crown be satisfied. Only then there will be enough blood.
He lifted his eyes to Edron's back. 1 step, 2, distance small and impossible both.
No, this thing has put a spell on me. A voice that was not a voice answered, soft as a heartbeat. You have no choice. The knight must die. He has already betrayed you. Ysara's gaze fixed on him, unblinking. Her voice barely stirred the hush. You will be the hand that cuts. It was not praise, not condemnation. A naming. Edrin growled. He pressed his palms to the ironwood. The crown's beat pounded louder, eager. I bear the oath. I bear the blade. I choose. Morgale burned hand lifted from the pedestal. Ash fell from her skin. Her eyes moved from Edrin to Darien and stayed. That, she said flatly, is precisely what the crown denies you. It has already taken him. The answer is written in his blood. All it waits for is his hand. Her eyes flicked sideways at him. Just a breath, but heavy. Wasn't it your hand that opened the rope? Edrin's jaw clenched. The thought pressed in. Perhaps it had been. Above them, the basalt ribs leaned a fraction inward. Dust sifted down in a fine veil, drifting sideways, undecided which way gravity should go. The polished floor reflected them again, not mirrors now, but echoes, bent sideways, stretched until their faces almost belonged to strangers. Edrin lifted the crown, heavier than iron, lighter than thought. Its heartbeat climbed his arms and settled beside his own, counting with him, then for him. The runes on the pedestal stirred, lines uncrossing themselves. The gutter softened, remembering wet. Wait. Anselm the voice shook. If he swears and bleeds, who records it? He raised the closed book like a shield. If I am unmade, what holds the truth? You will write it, Ysara said. Or you will fade writing it. The sky will not ask which. Darian's grip tightened. The heat surged once, finding the crown's rhythm. Iron taste in his mouth, though he had not bitten. A sense that if he spoke now, something older would answer with his voice. Edrin set the crown into the cradle of stone. It fit as if the pedestal had been carved for it, and the world around that. The inscriptions writhed and settled. Morgale read through clenched teeth. Blood of the bound mends the sky. The binding binds the wound. She drew a breath as if it cost her. Name the oath. Name the hand. The silence pressed until it felt like weight. Edrin looked at them. Morgale's burned hands. Anselm's thinning presence. Ysara's stillness that was not peace. The boy with a sword and 2 pulses. My oath, Edrin said. My hand. The words tasted too easy, as if spoken before, perhaps on the rope. With Mael in his grip, the crown answered with a single eager beat. The floor shivered. The ribs leaned lower, bending to listen. Somewhere high above, a thin noise tried to be sound and failed, a seam straining. That night they made their camp beneath the bowed stone. None slept easily. The dream. When Edrin closed his eyes, he dreamed of the rope. It hung loose over the chasm, rocky platforms at both terminals obscured by soot. The darkness beneath was denser than evening, starless. Gusts whispered across the bridge, like air inhaled too deeply and never released. A figure waited, cloak in tatters, crown fused to a skull of shadow. Its face blurred, memory refusing to fix it. Only the mouth showed, teeth too white for ruin. So, it said, voice like cracked iron, you are the new one. Edrin's hand went to his sword. It rose slow, as if the dream wanted him unarmed. The new what? The new servant. I was Valtheris. Now you. I will never serve. Oh, but you already have. The laugh was hollow, echoing itself. A knife gleamed in its hand. The dream bent. Mael's eyes as she fell. Calm, certain. The rope slackening in his glove. Fibers cut neat. The knife descending. You will serve the crown, Valtheris said. There is no choice. The cloak blew wide. Beneath it, letters crawling bone, words spelling and unspelling themselves. The knife lifted again. Edrin woke with a gasp. The hall was dark, ribs bowed above. His gauntlet clenched the rope at his side, grinding fibers. Sweat chilled his neck. A metallic tang clung in his mouth. That knife, he thought. Was it mine? In the shadows, Ysera's eyes were already open. She had been watching him sleep. Chapter 9. They had no choice but to continue. After the dream of Valtheris, Edrin's eyes still burned. His hand still clenched rope that was no longer there. Ysera had not spoken of it, but she had not looked away either. Now the pedestal waited, runes shifting like wounds that refused to close. They set the crown on the stone. Its iron rings twitched faintly, eager for the first drop. Morgale drew a circle of ash and salt to hem it in. Each line trembled as she laid it down, dust slipping sideways as if even ash feared the work. She lifted her scarred palms. The sigils there blazed dull red. What rises falls, what burns erases. Her words were flat, not invocation, but verdict. The runes brightened in answer. She nodded once to Edrin. He stepped forward, his knees bent slow, deliberate, until he knelt before the crown. He unbuckled his gorget and set it aside, baring his throat. The skin there felt colder than the rest of him, a strip of vulnerable flesh, exposed in a place that did not forgive weakness. He thought of St. Brand's cracked altar, of Mael's hand slipping into the black, of the rope fibers slackening under his glove. Was this the same hand? I am bound, he said. His voice came steady, but the word bound clung to him, pressing into his bones. Ysera clasped her hands. Her lips moved quick in prayer, though no sound escaped. Her gaze fixed not on the crown, but on Darien, as though she could see the blade's shadow already moving. Brother Anselm's quill hovered over the page. Ink bled backward, crawling up the nib and retreating into the well. Lines he had written earlier thinned and drained away, leaving the parchment pale, as if the book itself had decided truth could not be kept. His own name, once faint, was gone. Now even the space where it had been collapsed inward. Like a mouth refusing to remember, a strangled breath escaped him. He gripped the book harder, as though weight alone could keep him from vanishing. Then the world hushed. Not silence as men know it, where hearts thrum and lungs rasp. This was total. Light remained, but sifted, diffuse, like dust seen through water. Even that blood gave no rhythm. Edrin felt his own heart falter into absence. The steady drum he had trusted was gone, leaving him balanced on emptiness. Morgale staggered. Her mouth opened in a hiss of pain, but no sound came. The sigils on her hands inverted, black where they had been red, ash where they had been flame. She pressed her palms together and shook, as if holding herself shut. No, she thought. She knew she had screamed it. The silence ate it whole. Edrin bowed his head. The void pressed against his bare throat, like the edge of a blade already waiting. He had told himself this was knightly honor, but it felt too much like surrender. Darien stepped forward. Heat ran up from the hilt, and a second pulse drove through his arm into his chest, pushing aside the beat that had been his own. It felt as though the sword had taken his blood and forced it to flow on its rhythm. His tongue dried to copper. Darien, Edrin said. His lips shaped it, but it reached only the boy's eyes, not his ears. The knight's head bent lower. You are my squire. Darien's throat moved. Yes, my lord. His voice came silent into the suffocating hush. But inside him, a second voice spoke the words at the same time. Clearer, sharper, eager. Yes, my lord. Keep your oath, Edrin shaped again. His mouth was calm, his eyes closed. Yes, my lord, Darien mouthed. The double voice within him echoed it louder. Yes, my lord. The blade rose higher, edge glimmering dull. His pulse doubled, one his, one not. Ysara moved, sudden, desperate. She caught his wrist with both hands, nails digging until blood welled. Her eyes rolled white, pupils vanishing. Her lips formed a warning in silence. Scars tear fast. Above them, a fracture unstitched itself across the hall's ribs. Dust rained down, silent, drifting sideways as if even gravity had lost its order. Darian's arm trembled. The sword hovered over Edrin's bowed neck, shaking between oath and hunger. The crown pulsed once, hard enough that everyone felt it, and the blade surged downward, urged by a will not his own. Chapter 10. The Hand That Falls. The sword hung above Edrin's bowed head. Darian's arm shook. The blade wavered, edge catching the gray light. Ysara clamped both hands around his wrist, nails cutting skin. Morgale stood at the pedestal with the crown caged to her hip, burned palms trembling. Brother Anselm hunched over his book, quill biting the page, though ink crawled the wrong way up the nib. Silence held the hall shut like a lid. No breath, no bell, only the pulse. It came from the crown, low, heavy, patient. Each beat knocked in Darian's bones, then in the stone, then back into him again, as if the hall were learning his rhythm and using it against him. Edrin knelt bare-throated before the pedestal. He set his gauntlets flat on the flagstones and lowered his head as if presenting a prayer. The crown's iron rings rattled once, a cat's purr turned into a chain's whisper. The world leaned closer. The hilt burned in Darian's palm, not heat enough to blister, heat enough to own. It sent a steady tremor up his forearm, into the soft place at the base of his throat, where a second heartbeat had been testing itself for days. Now it kept time without asking. Cut, the beat said. Not a word. A function. Protect, his oath answered. A word. A life. His mouth dried.
Ysara's grip tightened, nails cutting until blood slicked her fingers. She braced her knee against the stone and pulled back with all her weight. Her lips shaped words the silence devoured. No, don't do it, knight. Protect yourself. He is not himself. It's the crown guiding his hand. Edrin turned slowly toward them. His eyes met Ysara's first, then Darian's trembling grip on the blade. A sigh slipped from him, heavy as stone. If this is what it takes for the crown, he murmured, then let it be mine. Stop him, Morgale mouthed from the pedestal. The silence swallowed it whole. Only the strain in her throat showed the command had been spoken. Her hands shook around the crown. The ash sigils in her palms flared dull red, then black, then red again, the glow of a coal fighting not to go out. She pressed forward, every line of her body braced against the will that pulled Darian's arm. Morgale thrust both burned palms forward, ash sigils flaring. Her mouth shaped the wrong tongue, each syllable jagged, heavy, meant to bind. The words struck Darian's arm like chains of fire. For a heartbeat, the blade halted. Then the crown pulsed. The force shuddered back through the spell, snapped the syllables in her mouth, and slammed into her chest. She staggered, gasping, black smoke curling from the cracks in her palms. The sigils guttered, flared once more, then went out. Her knees hit the stone. Her lips moved, but no sound formed. Whatever answer she'd tried to speak had been stolen. Anselm dragged lines across the parchment. Letters took, then slid, then erased themselves mid-stroke, as if the page were a frozen lake and everything he wrote broke through. His name at the top of the leaf had thinned to a pale scrape. He pressed harder. Ink fled from the nib and fled from the word that should have been him. The crown pulsed. Dust lifted from the flagstones, drifted sideways, then settled as if gravity had forgotten which way was down. The basalt ribs above bowed inward by the width of a finger. The blade sank a hand's breadth lower.
Darian set his teeth and tried to draw the sword up and away. The muscles in his shoulder jumped. His elbow burned. The blade rose a little, stuttered, stopped. The heat in the hilt answered with its own decision and pressed the steel back toward flesh.
He swallowed and tried to speak. No sound. His jaw made the shape of my lord, and nothing came of it but ache. Edrin did not look up. He had placed his weight forward, a soldier distributing the pain before it arrived. His breath moved once, measured, and was still. There was no tremor in his neck. If he feared, the fear was a private thing between oaths. Ysara hauled Darian's wrist higher, fighting for inches. Her own fingers slid on his blood. She braced her knee against the flagstone, teeth bared with effort. A thin line of red tracked across her palm where his skin cut her back. You must defend yourself, knight. Morgale stooped up and slammed the heel of her hand into the crown's rings. The iron clattered and sang nothing. Her mouth formed the wrong tongue, syllables heavy and precise. The rings quivered, then settled, unbothered. The crown chooses blood.
The letters climbed higher beneath Anselm's skin until they reached his throat. His mouth worked soundlessly. He tried to swallow, but his throat was no longer his own. His fingers clawed at the edge of the lectern, nails splitting against the wood. His eyes had turned pale, and in the flicker of that light, his face looked borrowed, not possessed. Then it happened. His lips twisted into a shape that wasn't his, and a voice came. Half Anselm, half something else. Soft, mechanical, wrong. Open, share, the gate. The words weren't speech. They were commands. Release protocols spoken in the old machine tongue, the kind Edrin had only heard in corrupted logs, the kind used to unlock. Anselm's good hand moved on its own. The joints shuddered as if pulled by invisible strings, reaching for the metal clamps that held the altar's frame shut. Anselm, Kira cried, voice breaking. She grabbed for him, but his arm kept moving, unhearing. His fingers closed around the hook. As he pulled, the book in front of him exhaled a plume of cold, briny vapor. Letters lifting from the page, melting into the air, seeping into the stone. A sigil on the far wall flared to life. Metal groaned. The lower hatch shivered open by a finger's width. Air long trapped inside began to stir, a breath older than men. Edrin saw it all at once. Not just Anselm dying, but being used. The man who had spoken their names in prayer, now reduced to a voice that betrayed them. Something broke loose in him. Rage like a clean flame, too sudden to think. This was no sacrifice. This was a machine making men betray each other. He moved. A sword came up from the floor with a metallic scream, the sound of faith snapping its last chain.
If this is what the crown demands, he said, low and harsh, then I'll not kneel for it. I'll face it standing. The pulse answered with a tremor through stone and bone. Steel rang without sound. Darian came on fast, faster than Edran had ever seen him. The boy's form was precise, practiced, each stroke delivered with the confidence of a hand that no longer questioned itself. Edran met him, their blades locking. The strength behind it startled him, too much for a squire's wrist. For a breath, he saw the opening, the place to thrust and end it. His body knew the motion, knew it would land. But his arm balked. He had trained Darian's hand not to sever it. Darian's eyes, washed white, bore down on him without recognition. Edran gritted his teeth. He shifted his weight back, sword angled low, refusing to strike the way instinct screamed. Every choice he made left him retreating, while the crown drove the boy forward. Darian pressed harder, his blade snapping forward in a rhythm too perfect, too merciless. Every stroke came like memory reversed, moves Edran himself had taught, now wielded against him without hesitation. Steel shrieked across steel, sparks dying in silence. Edran's boots scraped against the stone as he gave ground. He could end it. He knew the measure, the reach, the flaw in every guard. One step, one thrust, and the boy would fall. But his chest locked with guilt. He saw not an enemy, but the soot-faced child from St. Bran, the one who had not cried when the world burned. The boy who had once clung to his shoulder and whispered, "Stay close." The crown's voice broke through Darian's throat, low and grinding. The crown keeps, the crown claims. His eyes, pale and depthless, did not belong to him anymore. Edran parried, teeth bared, every movement half-strength, pulled back from the killing edge. His arm knew restraint where it should have known survival, and restraint was the one thing the crown was waiting for. Darien lifted his blade to meet him, but the motion was not his own. His eyes had gone pale, whites drowning the iris. His lips moved, shaping words he had never learned. Blood. Knight. Betrayer. The voice was not his. It carried the weight of stone and iron, the will of the crown pressed into sound. Edren's gut clenched. For a heartbeat, he was not facing his squire, but the thing that had hollowed him. The pulse answered with a tremor through stone and bone. Edren could win. One twist, one riposte, and it would end. He didn't. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat. Darien's gaze begged, though not with his voice. The crown pulsed darkly at his throat. Edren lowered his guard. Steel cut across his throat in one clean line. Warmth flooded his chest, bright against the stone. His breath left steady, deliberate, as though this too was a vow. Ysara lunged, catching him before he fell. She cradled him in her lap, nails biting half-moons into his skin, as if she could hold him there. Tears blurred her sight. Her lips moved soundlessly. It was always you. The hall froze. Then the crown pulsed, a drumbeat beneath the earth. Dust rippled, ribs groaned, stone shuddered. Outside, the torn sky pinched with a jagged silver seam. A scar, not a healing. Morgale staggered upright, dragging the crown to her hip. It pulsed like a living heart, steady and endless. Anselm dropped his quill. His page bore the lines still. The crown chooses blood. Above it, his name was gone. He mouthed it, pleading, but none of them looked his way. Already they could not recall him. Darien stood trembling, sword wet in his grip. Heat surged up his arm, anchored in his throat. Two pulses now beat in his blood, his and the crown's. He pressed his fingers to his neck. The new rhythm claimed him. Knight, it whispered. Or maker of knights. He had no answer. Ash drifted from the ribs above, gray as old bone. Beyond the hall's shattered mouth, a single bell tolled. One note. Final. Without echo. Ysara bent over Edren's body. Morgale staggered under the crown. Anselm faded. Darien last, throat tight with a name that was no longer his, sword dragging heavy at his side. The scar in the sky did not close, and in Darien's chest the second pulse kept time.